Good afternoon, students. I hope everyone's staying healthy, staying safe. And I wanted to, because only 5 students showed up to class today. I don't know if it was just because of confusion around the recalibration period or what it was, but you missed a really good conversation about the last act of Richard III. I think there's still a lot we've left to talk about, left over from Act 4 in terms of the way the women sort of rally against the men and join together in a chorus of lamentation as the men around them are literally being killed off. But we did end up kind of jumping forward to talk about the very climactic ending. And so I just wanted to post a quick lecture to maybe fill you in. I'm probably not going to be quite as eloquent when I'm recording as I think I was earlier today during class, but I'm just going to do my best while it's still fresh in my memory to try to remind you all, or to, yeah, fill in some of those missing pieces for you. So the first thing I said is the most famous line in this play, arguably, is at the end of the battle in Act 5 when Richard III has been fighting Richmond. So Richmond has shown up. A lot of Richard's men have deserted him, and he's losing the battle. And in desperation, he cries out, my horse, my kingdom for a horse. And he's been knocked off his steed, finding himself very vulnerable. So I asked the class, why do you think that line would be so famous? What is so poignant, especially in terms of what we learned about Richard III, that makes that line so powerful? So what we know is that we talked about Clarence's dream in Act 1, and there's another dream that happens. And so this is Act 5, Scene 3, when these ghosts appear. So it's the night before the battle, and a series of ghosts of the men, including the children, Richard has killed, appear to him in a dream. And we've learned from Clarence's dream that dreams can be prophetic in this play. And in fact, they show that there is another kind of battle going on. So you have like the physical battle between and the struggle for power between all the characters as Richard is clawing his way to the top. And then you have the spiritual battle in contradistinction to the material battle. You have the spiritual battle sort of hovering above the play. And dreams are one way that the spiritual battle can express itself. And in fact, the spiritual battle is more powerful than the material battle, especially in this Christian world where, the afterlife means more than your short term on earth. And we've talked about how, Queen Margaret in whatever it was, Act 1, Act 2, curses all the other characters. So dreams and the spirit worlds are a way for women in particular to try to harness control over a world that they have, in which they have no power, as the men sort of ruin things and are incredibly destructive around them. So you could almost make the argument that dreams and the spiritual battle show that women have more power than we think, that Queen Margaret was absolutely right in her curse, and that keeps coming up over and over again through the rest of the play. The dream here, we have a series of ghosts that appear actually first to Richard, and they say to him, despair and die, and then they turn towards Richmond and they say, prosper and live, or live and prosper. So I talked with the class, with Genesis, about how this means that if you're picturing the stage, the ghost has to come to the middle of the stage, and you have the two separate camps. And first turn to Richard, curse Richard, then turn to Richmond, curse Richmond, which contributes to the sense that these two characters are the direct opposite of one another, that Richmond represents everything that is pure, stable, honorable, and right about England, and Richard represents everything that is honestly deformed and morally depraved and villainous. in terms of the land. And you also see that leading up to this moment when Richmond, it seems to be in control of his sleeping schedule. He gives a very rousing speech to his men where he calls on the honor of the land and of themselves and of society. You know, it's a very motivational speech that draws on higher ideals versus Richard's speech to his men. If you compare the two, okay, I guess this comes after, but you know, the two speeches that happen before the battle, Richard's speech basically just insults the enemy, says they're all like dogs, and we don't want them to pillage our towns and rape our wives, right? So we should go after them. So if you were going to battle, which ideals would you rather fight for? Would you rather fight for something higher than yourself, for these noble purposes, or would you rather fight just because you have some leader who's already shown himself to be corrupt, telling you that the other side is depraved? And so the people on Richard's side aren't themselves very reliable. In fact, at one point, we're told that, where does it say this? His friends are not really his friends. The only ones who act like their friends do so, like his friend, do so out of fear, right? So there are no actual true followers of Richard by this point, and Buckingham, his right-hand man, oh yeah, so this is page 271, Act 5, Scene 3. Blunt, this guy Blunt, says, he hath no friends but what are friends for fear, which in his dearest need will fly from him. So he does not have any loyal followers versus Richmond's army, and they're very much the sky, the sun seems to be sort of beaming on their success. All of the features of the environment in the world show themselves to be in Richmond's favor versus Richard, who has this nightmare. And the nightmare has a material effect on him as well, as though pushing itself into the material world, because the most impactful and perhaps famous speech of Richard's occurs on page 287, Act 5, Scene 3. This is what we spent most of our time talking about. And this is coming back to the question of why my kingdom for a horse is so powerful. So he has this dream of all these dead people haunting him. And he starts up out of the dream. Give me another horse, bind up my wounds. That's foreshadowing the lack of a horse that's about to happen to him in the battle. Have mercy, Jesu, soft I did but dream. O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me? The lights burn blue, it is now dead midnight. Cold, fearful drops stand on my trembling flesh. What do I fear? Myself? There's none else by. Richard loves Richard, that is, I am I. Is there a murderer here? No. Yes, I am. Then fly. What, from myself? Great reason why, lest I revenge. You can already see here, we talked about iambic pentameter and how if the meter is regular, according to this iambic pentameter beat, your character is probably pretty in control of himself. And one of Richard's dominant characteristics is that he is a magnificent performer. And we rarely ever get to see into his internal mind. That throughout the entire play, when he's seducing Anne, when he seduces Queen Elizabeth's child through her, when he convinces all the citizens that it's their decision to launch him into the throne along with the mayor. All of that is because of his external machinations and just how in control of his body and his actions and his external persona he is. So rarely do we get any insight at all into his internal life. In fact, this entire play, we get to see Richard as an actor. But here, finally, we actually do see that he has some semblance of remorse and humanity and grief. We talked about in the first act that the second murderer personifies conscience, as he later has a change of heart about his task to murder Clarence. Well, here, too, conscience is personified. O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me? So if, as the murderer said, conscience is always hovering behind you, following you on the street, tapping away at your manhood to make you think twice about what you've been directed to do. Conscience will eventually get to all of us, and finally conscience has sought out Richard, and this is the only time we really see that, the inner conflict here. So he's afflicted by coward conscience. Cold, fearful drops are standing on his trembling flesh. He has this actual physiological reaction to the dream, to the nightmare that he just had. And then the meter is so mixed up. You can even just see looking at these lines. I'm sorry, I meant to actually go down to this page so you can watch on the screen. Here we are. But you can see, right, even just like the way the end of the line is like very zigzaggy, that is a manifestation of his internal conflict. And you have all of these stops and starts. They're actually called chiasmas, chiasmas. So when you have that kind of break in the middle of a line, and there are multiple breaks here, there's no regularity at all. And so it's like his external performance is completely broken down. Another thing we talked about in discussion is how the word myself comes up over and over again. In fact, he's having an argument with himself. Fly, what from myself? Great reason why, lest I resent revenge. What, myself upon myself? Alack, I love myself. Wherefore? For any good that I myself have done unto myself? Oh no. Alas, I rather hate myself, for hateful deeds committed by myself. I am a villain, yet I lie, I am not. Fool, of thyself speak well. Fool, do not flatter. So you see how he's arguing only with himself. It also shows how obsessed with himself he is. He's definitely shown throughout the play to be egotistical. And here, that ego breaks down into these multiple personas where he's trying to remain, well, he says he's not even sure if he's a villain or not. Whereas at the end of the first speech, way back at the beginning of the play, he says that I am resolved or determined to become a villain. And even now at the end, we don't know if that's happened. He then says, back to personified conscience, my conscience had 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale. So that means voices. So the conscience has 1,000 different voices that has a different story. I think that refers to both the inner voices that he's hearing and the actual ghosts that he just encountered in his sleep that visited him in his mind and told the story of their own tragedies. There's a lot of other repetition: pity, guilty, soul, and then a moment of real, like, if we ever see the humanity in Richard, it's here. And it's kind of, you almost do feel sorry for him. He says, I shall despair. There's no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul will pity me. And wherefore should they, since that I myself find in myself no pity to myself? Again, the repetition of myself. And here he's saying that even he can't find a reason to pity himself or to love himself. He is dying all alone. He has abandoned or murdered all of his friends. And now he realizes that the spiritual battle that's been waging this whole play is finally coming to get him. So back to the question at the beginning, and I only have 1 minute left. Why is my kingdom for a horse, my kingdom for a horse? Why is that so powerful? Well, what he's literally saying is he would give away at this moment when he's dismounted and he knows he's probably going to die, he would give away the entire kingdom just to get back on a horse so that he could possibly survive. And I think that final exclamation, I think it's his final line, I have to double check that, shows Richard's humanity underneath it all, that just like the rest of us, he's really just concerned with surviving, with getting by, and all of the pursuits that he's expended his whole life on are ultimately meaningless. Just, wealth and gold laying at the bottom of the sea, just like in Clarence's dream. So it's kind of like he ends up being a coward and begging to survive, even at the expense of his kingdom. So I hope this helps show the power of some of these final speeches and clarify some of the issues if you weren't able to join with us today.